they use the Spanish spelling, chamorro, and they don't like to be called chamorro, and the other way around. So we have to be aware of this, right?
Where does the capital H come from?
One, only one.
But why close capital letters? Why?
Because I don't know in which, I read about this, but I don't remember exactly the why they believe this is more similar to their own way of naming themselves. And they consider that this is colonialism, Spanish, and they don't want to be chamorro. So we have to be careful.
It's also in the other islands, not Guam. They don't themselves chamorro, and they really do not like chamorro.
No, exactly.
Why?
So, because the other islands all belong to the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. They are two different different countries. So,
Entonces,
and as I said, in the Northern Mariana Islands, there is nothing similar to this political consciousnness. Emergent, it has been going on for decades now in Guam, no? But there is nothing like that.
Yeah.
So they don't problematize colonialism, I would say. They don't question these origins and this history as much as they do in Guam.
But you can question why they don't.
Yeah, we can ask
engage
why.
with these questions, and it's maybe because Guam is a little bit more westernized, a little bit more with access to these types of debates that we're having here.
Universities.
They have universities, they have museums, so they're engaging more with politically correct ways of doing things. But I wouldn't go as far as to say that people in the Northern Mariana Islands don't feel colonized or don't feel like they don't have an indigenous identity, you know?
No, they feel like they have an indigenous identity, but they don't question as much as we can tell because of our interaction with them in Rota. They don't problematize colonialism, they don't hate having been colonized by the Spanish, so to say, in a very simplistic way, right? Whereas in Guam, of course, they don't want to be colonial subjects, and they don't like to have been colonial subjects forever now, for so many centuries. And so this is a way to vindicate their identity against the past, the colonial past.
Yeah, I understand. I just think that if there is a movement emerging in the islands, especially on Guam, where people are reclaiming their indigenous identity and talking about being less Spanish, I personally would feel more comfortable following that train of decolonial thought, even if it doesn't yet apply to the other islands.
Yes, but if you refer to the people in the Northern Mariana Islands with a name that they don't like, or that they don't feel necessary, that's not correct either, I would say, because that's their choice, not your choice.
I understand, but then I guess I'm just interested because I will also be talking mainly about Guam, because the people were relocated to Guam, so I'm working with Guamanian history mainly, because there was no people during Spanish colonization of the Mariana Islands.
That's also a kind of a problem because one has been thoroughly studied from many perspectives and points of view, whereas the Mariana Island, no, has not.
Yeah.
So we don't want to reinforce this trend in which one takes all the visibility while we are working on Rota.
Yeah.
We have to be careful about this too, because I know that you want to sample in Guam, you want to do things in Guam, but we built the project specifically against this historiography that gives Guam all the prominence, also because of the reason that I explained yesterday. Because Guam was touched from minute one, whereas Rota no. And we use Rota as a case study of indirect colonialism.
In what way would it be indirect?
As I explained yesterday, if you say, I'm going to explain the impacts of colonialism in Guam from the botanical perspective, etc. There's no case there, because we know that Guam was touched in 1521, and then the contact was dense for the whole century, 140 years or so, that there was no formal settlement on Guam yet, but the interaction was continuous. So there is no research question, there is no challenge, because everybody's going to be on agreement with that. But here, what we were trying to do it now is to say, okay, because of the indigenous agency, the impact of colonialism got to places in which the Europeans didn't go, which is the case of Rota. So we are trying to demonstrate that colonialism, Europeans got a play here, got a role to play here. But the impacts of colonialism were large and relevant and horrible because of the indigenous role in the process, in the historical process. So it's kind of, it was not intentional that they were bringing diseases somewhere else, but because of their interactions were so ingrained in their culture, because the islands were not remote and isolated, but they were all in contact. It was a global world already.
Until the Spanish arrived and prevented them from going to the other islands.
Yeah, but you have to think that the Spanish got there in 1521, and they only settled there in 1668. In Guam, not in the other islands. So there is a gap of more than 1 century, but things were happening already in that century. This is the point. So if we could have the political resolution to prove that the demographic demise in Rota started early on, if we could say it didn't start at the end of the 17th century, but it had started before, for example, no? These kind of things. Or you could find a very well contextualized rat, European rat in Rota. These kind of things. This is why we have to pay attention to this, because we want to extrapolate this history to the rest of the Pacific. We are interested in Rota and in the Marianas and in the Chamorro people, and we want to tell their history right. But the potential of Rota is that we can tell the history of so many people at the same time.
But isn't the history of the Chamorro people also being displaced in Central Guam? That's part of the Chamorro history. Is people moving from Rota to Guam, whether it's by force or not by force.
Sorry, yeah, this is the revolution. This is the revolution. And I was also interested in the information you gave about 100 people, because my information is different. Okay. So what I mentioned yesterday is that at on the year 1700, there were 400 people in Rota living in Songson. So they had been displaced from the rest of the island and moved to Songson, because this is where the Spanish settled, Songson. But this is what the documents say, right? We have a case study, we have an archaeological site in Rota, which is called Alawan, which is a very remote valley, very difficult to get there. And this is said to be a place of refuge for the people who escaped from the Spanish at the beginning of the Spanish settlement. And this is a large place, probably more than 100 people, but we don't know, we cannot know. Actually, we want to use LiDAR there to be able to count the amount, because you see the houses, they are under the forest, and you see the houses, so you can count how many houses you have in this village, and then you can estimate population numbers, etc. And then you can challenge the historical records, because of course the Spanish were writing the little things that they knew, but they didn't know everything. They were not moving around so much to understand the population dynamics in Rota. But it is true that people were forced to resettle somewhere else, but late. I would say this is late in the process.
This was around a couple of years after Spaniards arrived that they started the process of la reducción, and then that was what caused the demographic collapse.
No, this is the point. So you say that the demographic collapse would begin in the 1670s.
Well, it would begin with the introduction of disease. And then this is something that happened in all newly found territories that Europeans colonized. But my argument would be that La Reducción, the process, made it go a lot faster, this spread of disease, because people were being put in small concentrated areas, which is prime territory for disease to spread. So if people were not being forced to live in small concentrated communities, maybe the demographic wouldn't have gone down as fast and as much as it did, because they would be able to live spread out, or maybe if the Spanish had made an effort to quarantine sick people from not sick people. So all of these colonial processes do affect the demographic changes, even if it was disease that was the main killer. Does that make sense?
Of course, any enforcement that you place on any population is going to have an impact and accelerate any damage that you are doing to this population, right? But the point here is to say that even if there was no colonial settlement, no resettlement, no enforcement, even in that situation, the impact was enormous. Because Guam is large, but not that large. And the villages were not isolated. So anything happened on the leeward side of Guam is going to have an impact on the other side of Guam, and even on both. So this is the idea, and it's very difficult to prove. That's why we are using proxies. We are using settlement patterns, and we are using vegetation. Because archaeologically, as I just said, it's very difficult. This was my first attempt when I started with these things. And you cannot do this archaeologically speaking, conventionally, using conventional archaeology, you cannot do this. So this is why we are using settlement patterns. So if there is an impact on the other side of Guam, for example, that happens very early, after Magellan, you have to look for the ways to study this. And for me, settlement patterns are the obvious way through, because I haven't found any other way to go. And so this is what you are saying is exactly what we are trying to demonstrate. So your assumption is something that everybody else is going to agree on. But we are going beyond that. We are trying to prove that even if the Spanish did nothing intentionally, they had an impact. And we know this happened with Cook and with the English and the French. They just interacted with the people. They didn't oblige anyone to move and live some other place when they arrived in an island, etc. But still, the impact was large, very large, because of the transmission of disease. And because rats jumped out of the ship, and for, this. And we cannot study archaeologically speaking the cultural impact, the cultural shock. We cannot learn how these people reacted to the sudden realization that aliens were arriving in their islands, right? Because they were complete aliens. They were human beings, but the dress and the boats and the technology was so different. So we cannot measure that. But we can try to approach the impacts in some other ways. So this is the thing, that we are trying to go beyond the state of the art. I don't know if I am clear enough.
No, I understand.
I think we are already in the midst of history, but I think we should advance. I also don't know.
Yeah,
We should continue it maybe later,
Yeah,
because this is important, of course. Yeah.
It was only about the terminology. It was going to take 1 minute, but because you raised the issues, I think
Yeah.
it's important that we
No, it's
understand.
important.
It's good
Are we-
to be on the same page.
Are we gonna have a talk on ethics and community engagement
Excuse me.
tomorrow? Okay.
Yeah,
Talk on
yes,
ethics and community engagement.
yes. But this is something that we should speak directly with Chamorro committee.
Yeah, like this is something that we should sit down with elders in the community, people in the community and decide what they personally want us to identify.
This is what we get from our experience.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
But I wanted to have the one, also the one interaction, so that's why I'm trying to find people that meet us on Monday, June 8th, on one, so that they can give us their perspective.
Okay.
I think this is important, but I am not very successful so far, but I try to like somewhere.
Yeah.
Or-
Lights are over there.
Ready? Or, okay.
So you go ahead.
No. It's also because I'm just presenting a very brief and general introduction, and I currently have a Trans-Pacific project, and I selected then, of course, some concrete examples from them, and then my colleagues Mariana Sanchez and Mathieu Torg, they will go into more detail, also introduce to you some concrete historical methodological theories that exist, but we won't go into too much detail. So we will have basically two presentations. So to start with, we gave you a small homework or just to consider about what do you think a historian does? Many of the issues and what we are doing have been raised in the last 2 days already, and you will see there are many repetitions. But what do you think? What does a historian do?
Biologists will say historians read books and write books about other people's books. But, I know that's, that's what they say.
Tell the stories of the past.
Other?
I feel like it's unfair if Joel or I answer the question. I personally would say it's looking at historical sources and being able to find patterns in certain things in order to tell stories that may be obscured, but there's also a human component to it. You form a relationship with the documents, the people that are speaking to you from history. You have to understand the perspective from which they're coming, the way that they write, the connections that they have, who things might be written for, all the internal biases in order to understand why we think a certain thing about the past and whether or not that's actually true.
Okay, I will start with a minute to summarize, I think, what I also want to give you on the way is that, of course, as historians, we work with sources. We have had yesterday various kinds of sources. And I would ask you, as a historian also, or if you work historically, to start from your sources. To start from a methodology. There was a famous German philosopher who said, if you start with a methodology before you know your object of research, this is like attacking your research objects with spears and stakes or so. So you really should start from your sources. Then, to be critical, you have sources, maybe you have a text or so, you have to look who has been writing it under what conditions. You have to be very critical. You have to contextualize your sources, under what circumstances it happened. And I think particularly in our case, not only in this project, but also what we as historians, I would say in our case, it's also focused on history of science. We are quite open, and we have to be open. Here we are collaborating with ethnobotanists, with archaeologists, and I, for example, I consider myself also as a kind of an archaeologist, because archaeology, it's material culture. You cannot understand many things without considering the material culture, material objects. So it's actually interdisciplinary. So, what Fasil has said, yeah, history, this I think it's from Wikipedia, when I wanted to show what do they say, what is history? History is the systematic study and interpretation of the past. I would say, no, we don't really want to interpret the world. This is a philosophical question. We really want to know what happened in the past and why did it happen? Why did it happen? And I think in this context, it's very, very important to always realize yourself that the politics of today is the history of tomorrow, and that what happened yesterday, actually, it was the interests of people who made politics and who were important in politics and economy. We are looking also on those who are not officially in the historical records because they have been neglected, because they haven't been rulers or so. So we also have to look behind the scenes. We have to read between the lines. But what is very important, and I think it helps a lot also to contextualize your sources, to understand why missionaries or why Spanish king wrote this or that edict. It is very important to see that it was mostly always just economic and political interests. And we see a lot of also justifications why people did certain things. When you go to early modern history about the Mariana Islands, they talk about savages and about the uncultivated people or so. But today we have a different language, but we still have this kind of pattern. And if we go to 15th century Chinese history, then we see justification to send military troops to Southeast Asia to restore law and order. This is something that sounds very, very familiar to our modern days. So you have really to take or to consider that the past was actually not so different from the times we are living in today. There were also economic and political, cultural interests. This is what I said, justifications of actions of the ruling, moralization, that you have, for example, you have to fight against the evil. If you think of Reagan and the axis of evil, this all sounds very, very modern or so. It's not only that this happened in the past. So you have to be very critical also. Who was the author? Who wrote these sources and what do we see? Then we have to distinguish sources. I said official and private history. Official history is, for example, if you have annals of a country or so. Private history is more if you have letters, for example, letters that have been written, or diaries, There you find sometimes much, much more information. And in the past, for us historians, it was sometimes very, very difficult because you have really to comb through tons of documents. And I think this is for our project also with the collaboration with Patricia. You have followed it. It makes a great, great difference. Because nowadays with new technologies, we already can put in keywords to search, for example, for Rota or Mariana, Islas Marianas, and the computer or the archives will give us some key terms. But with the help of AI and digital humanities, it becomes really much, much more efficient. So in our context also, I said in the beginning, we have to be also open, and we look particularly also to the environment. So a key term also when you apply for funding, already for I think 15 years, this has been this expression human-environment interaction. This is really a kind of a key term, but this is actually also what we have been doing and what we plan to do also in this project. We want to see what kind of impact did human actions have on the environment and what repercussions can we see. Because of time, I won't go into the details, and Fernand Braudel, probably you have all heard of his famous work, La Méditerranée. But history, archaeology, and environment, this is actually what we also do as historians, even though it's not only history in the strictest sense. Sources, we have manifold types, origins, and languages. And this is something, especially in the Pacific, or as East Asian historian, you know, we have from Chinese, Japanese, we have Chamorro native languages. Many of them have been neglected. Then we have, of course, also Spanish. The majority is in Spanish, but not only. We have lots of Dutch, English, even French texts. So this is also a kind of a challenge. And then the origins, who was writing these kind of texts, and then types. We have different types, of course. I will briefly focus on some maps, because you can see we do not only have written textual evidence, texts, manuscripts, but we have visual evidence, we have paintings, even on ceramics. You find certain patterns, you find marks with characters or with names on it. Then we have maps. Maps, for example, have for a long period also been ignored by many historians who were only concentrating on the written narrative, on the written evidence, but actually they can also tell us stories. And so this is what I mean, you have been open, you have to consider various languages, various types of sources, and also work interdisciplinary. I here listed some disciplines I think that are essential for us, and we are all basically covering them. Here I take the example of cacao. I have been asking myself, okay, there has been a lot of research on the introduction of cacao to Europe, and the Spanish and the Europeans, they like to drink chocolate and cacao. But what about China? What impact did cacao chocolate have on China? Everybody knows they drink tea, they don't drink chocolate, they don't really eat chocolate. And then I was tracing this a little bit, first looking into the galleon cargo lists, what happened with chocolate. And you know the Manila galleon trade first from New Spain to Manila, and what happened in Manila. And this is, for example, a document, this is from the second half of the 18th century, it's quite late. But there you see that the official authorities, they have obliged the local populations, also in the countryside, to plant certain trees, certain species. You see here cacao, coconut palms, bongas, I think this is betel nut trees, pimienta, pepper, and algodon, cotton. And so they were counting this, and they even gave people some rewards if they planted lots of this. And then there's a whole story behind this. Later I went on, I was searching into all kinds of documents, and you have to look also beyond your strict research question. I found then in religious documents talking about China, what kind of impact chocolate had in China. And also that Chinese merchants, even though they didn't drink chocolate, they were engaged together sometimes with the Dutch in reselling cacao beans in the Southeast Asian waters. So you have to look a little bit beyond also, and if you are looking into an economic topic, you might find lots of information in religious sources. This is a kind of a map that is very, very, very famous. But if you don't look carefully, you would think maybe it's only a map of the Philippine archipelago of the 18th century. But maybe it is not clear, you cannot see it from there, but I will of course share this. But if you look to this illustration, you see not only buffaloes and rice fields, but here is a cacao tree. And this means also a cacao tree being displayed on a map. What does this mean? It means also, it implies that it has had some kind of impact. So these maps are not simply maps as we know them today, but they also tell us really lots of stories. This is, you have to be open, also look into the visual behind everything. This is something, and here again I have to mention Patricia, who is going to help me, even though at my university studies very long ago, in middle period history, I had to read Latin texts and we were trained a little bit in paleography, but this was a challenge for me to decipher this text, and I must admit that without the support of a Chilean colleague whom I met and his training, I would not have been able to read this text. Even together with my PhD student Carlos, we have been sitting there together and we still needed that. But what I found in this text, this is a kind of, it's called Bienes de Difuntos. It's a surgeon, a doctor who passed away on board of a ship in the 16th century, and we have been looking into the medicines and the plants they had on board in order to treat sick people. And what I realized, found by coincidence, that when I had this document, I could just hardly decipher it, is it has a list of books. So it tells you then a story, even though it's about a deceased surgeon, it tells you what kind of books, medical books, did a ship surgeon in the late 16th century have on board to consult if somebody fell ill. And here really I hope that especially with 16th, 17th century manuscripts who basically look like this, it's called dibujas. It's really, it's a kind of challenge that Patricia can help us a lot, and especially for the historians, that you don't have to sit down, you don't have the time to read this document, and it takes you half a year. So sources, again, I mentioned most of them. We really also have to include maps, paintings, visual and archaeological objects. I just selected this here. This is more 18th century. This is relatively easy to read. Somewhere here it's talking about cimenteras, arroz, maíz. And so you see, this is talking a little bit about agriculture. These are also texts where you can see it's talking about the Mariana Islands, what was happening there. Then some of the most important archives, really very briefly. I hope we have in the next session, maybe in Rota, more time to do this. We won't open the links now, but of course the most important archive also for the Marianas is the Archivo General de Indias in Sevilla. Here is a link, and we can sit together and we can open it, and I can show you how it works. Then also relatively important is the Archivo General de la Nación in Mexico City. They have a general guide here. In the past, you could only enter just one key term, and then it would take a long time and would give you just a few references. But they have also been very active, especially in the last 5 years. They have, meanwhile, a repositorio digital. This is another link where you really can look and search more specifically, and you can download many texts. They have really scanned lots of texts, so it's much more accessible. In the past, without going to Mexico City, there was no way out, so lots of progress. Then, of course, we have other also European collections that are important for us, including a British library. Also in the Philippines, this is also because many Jesuits or the Spanish then, they moved to the Marianas from the Philippines. These archives are also quite important, but there are many more. This is just a general survey. And just please play around a little bit and look into this. Then sources, maps here. You see, this is also a map. This is also 18th century. You see here the Mariana Islands listed. If you look to the years when these specific maps have been published, you will also see a development. Sometimes we have diaries of navigators or of Spanish Navy officials or of merchants who wrote something and described what they saw. And this is here something just to show you what a map can tell you. This is actually something I discovered. It is a map from the British Library. It's from the mid-18th century, and this is the Chinese coast. And then you see here lots of squares and islands, and these islands tell some small stories. So the map is actually also text and image. And we have here a small circle, and this is what attracted my attention, because there it says this is Peru. And in Peru, there is a plant that is called Peruvian balsam, and it helps to preserve the corpses of the dead. And I said, why would a Chinese map maker of that time tell such a story? If you think of Peru, the Peruvian balsam that actually doesn't really come from Peru, this is not the most important thing or so. Why did they tell this story? I wrote an article about it. If you're interested, you can read this. And it also tells, of course, a story about Chinese map making. That Peru is actually very close distance to the Chinese coast, which does not necessarily mean that they didn't know where Peru is, but it was their way of expressing Peru is something that impacts our history. It's very close to us, not directly, but via the Philippines, via Manila, because the Chinese merchants all went to Manila and brought lots of products, also plants, even medicines, also to food, beverages, also to Manila, and got paid by silver, Peruvian and Mexican silver. And through this silver, indirectly, through the Philippines, they were directly impacted. So that it's so close to the Chinese coast means it's very important for us. And here, this can be seen here better. Mariana Islands also, you have also here the Northern Mariana Islands. And here I have been investigating, for example, the ship diary of a Spanish naval officer who is very famous on one side of having discovered the Bay of California, San Francisco, and mapped the Peruvian coast. But nobody really knew that he went as far as Taiwan, that he touched almost the Japanese coast. And then in this diary, you can find some kinds of these place names. And in our digital platform, I've tried to reconstruct then the trajectory and the voyage of his ship. And you can compare then this private map or so that he drew, and sometimes you also find not yet known, not yet identified. And then you have official Spanish maps, and you can compare this. Okay, so I think I already went almost a little bit about time, but I would now give the word to Mariana and Mathieu. I think I would need your assistance of how to switch. Entonces, es la otra presentación. Sí. Sí, sí. Okay. Mariana. ¿No están?
Sí, están online.
Sí, a ver.
Está muteado. Ah, sí.
They're still muted.
No, we're okay now.
Hola. Ahora sí se oye.
¿Nos escuchan o no? Sí, okay. Yeah, we ran a little bit behind time, but it was important what we discussed before. Let's hope it works well.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes. Ellos no pueden mover uno.
Ah,
No.
pero
No es.
pueden compartir su pantalla si quieren.
Sí.
Y así pueden ir cambiando.
Mariana, pueden compartir su
No,
pantalla, quizás es más fácil, sí.
Ahora.
Compartir.
Podéis intentar compartir vuestra pantalla para controlar la presentación.
Sí.
Sí, podéis compartir vosotros.
Para controlarlos es mucho más fácil. It should be on the top or the bottom?
Bottom.
Bottom, okay.
Yeah, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there should be a button to share your screen.
Yeah. Otherwise we...
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
working.
something is coming.
Yeah,
Okay.
we can see it now, but you are muted.
Yeah,
No, it's not.
ponlo en modo de presentación.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so. So go ahead.
Okay, so I was saying, I'm going to, I hear an echo. Yeah.
Yeah, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You hear me again?
Yeah.
Yes.
You have to share it again.
Will you see my presentation now?
No.
Sharing. It's good?
Yeah, it's coming. Yeah.
Okay. So, I will present this series of historiographical products that have appeared in this presentation, but to have in your thesis. And it is important that you really know what comments are you using. You will be evaluated for that when you present. It happened in our specific project, one of our PhDs. So it's the question that we're going to So this is important. And I also want to make a disclaimer. I represent the historiographical evidence according to what they say they do or what they are supposed to do. So it's not my opinion together. I will only speak once, and I will let you know when it's okay. Also, I will use some words that I think are important, but they can be interpreted in a wrong way. Please don't interpret it wrongly. It's just sometimes we don't have better words for that, or the primary meaning is exactly what I need to say. It can be the example of indigenous people. Okay, so I won't use native, I will use indigenous, when it's the case. Yeah, for my generation or the progress reader, so yes, I can say Voldemort loud, but not because I can, but because sometimes it's just necessary to use the words. Okay, so that's don't take it badly or whatever, it's just a way to work. For that, I decided to start with the historiography of the colonial fact. So this is a historiography that actually appeared in the 1960s, carried by two historians and they often based may confront against criticism, which seeks to analyze colonization in the perspective of its own ideological commitments. These analyses are thus either apologetic or highly critical, with methodological information. It just has skills developed into three fronts: the administration approach, the exploration of territories, and the history of populations. So, for the study of the states, so the first focuses on the history of the state of the past, of the institutions, The approach focuses as well, and exists in the society, so what that is involve symbolic coordination. So this could be involved. This could be dance, lots of maybe or to see that this resources they use technology keeps that extended so I was made that not for the relationship which was possible and that this one realistic approach was universal. However, this exploration of the diversity I will change this to Europeans exploration like the Pacific they could understand how the natives have thousands, from island to island, without any technology aids, their own. This space of it not correspond to spatial perception, because of those things, discuss this very is So this really proposes in our perspective, also understands that there are us and there are requires that there are perspective. So that is attributed to this difference for his paper over our first studies because he oriented the English version. It is considered that the oceans are the spaces so sorry for the imagination. The second concept is beyond the representation. So you have this challenge theories based on the representation and has to be of the eyes on words. It also describes the studies technologies and figures which have been studied and projected at the moment of the image modifying their spaces. The third concept is right? So it's really, that's history, philosophy, arts, as well as science and economy. As a thing that is research on needs, ecologies, social education, or reaching many listeners, others. So yeah, it's very, very busy. And yes, I am this. So many times it's very important to for it. So I is center. There is some history of all cross of thought, that also possibly elements of the important characteristic of the group. So the history of that grows sources to the collective ecology of society. These sources consist primarily of the materials, so for us, point areas, but are not other objects, but we have areas with is a French concept, it is spread to the countries in Germany and English world. So in the next like there is the progress of the which is but also actually taking place in the values and the dates, and in the 1960s, we had good generation of experience in the context of the and the issues and challenges around the time. The definition of external is by our time and remains only in its approach to sometimes take from the economy and other times that of logic study. It is sometimes applicable on the of the is and at other times all the structures and the economy. But when the is a make process, why is my problem? And this is logic and simple. It offers practitioner, from various fields, where is social science. So, cultural studies, research at the definition of the history of mentalities and social history of the field. It's defined as a history connecting disabilities and social history representation. It is characterized by approach and technique of studies, all things related to the culture of society.
Yeah, the last part might have been a little bit dry, but I think it's important that you have heard all these terms and that you know what people are talking about when they speak about blue history or colonial history, post-colonial history, what this really is. So I think it was very important that Mariana in the end simply just briefly introduced it, and you can always go back to these slides. And what Mathieu has been doing, he has actually, you have seen what I told you in the beginning, he has done examples. We had the Alambique, we had maps, we had texts or so. This was just an example of how you go ahead, a specific research question, in this case of water supply. And this is also something we are looking here in the Pacific People Forest Project, also into regions, into species that have been neglected. And people have written a lot about maritime history, and nobody really delved into exactly how was the water supply arranged on board, things like this. So I think it really shows how important these so-called or alleged minor issues are. Thank you, Mariana and Mathieu.
Can I say
Yeah.
something? Sorry. Thank you so much, Matthew and Mariana, because this was really, really important. Especially Mariana's talk for me, this theoretical part, I love this kind of presentations because they are very clear. And you, of course, you don't need to define yourself. Like you don't need to say, I am a microhistorian or I am whatever. But it's important to keep in mind that even if you don't define yourself and you are not explicit about your theoretical perspective, you have it anyway. So we need to consider and to question from which perspective and point of view we are working. And Mariana, I wanted to ask you about the Pacific turn, because you didn't mention that, and there is this work by Ricardo Padrón, who, he is explicitly working within the Pacific turn. And, well, I wanted to hear your opinion. maybe we can catch you for some other lecture in the future, and you can talk about the Pacific turn if you want to. But I think it would be great. Oh, thank you so much. Anyone? Questions? No? Okay, then we are done for now, and we are going to have lunch. So thank you so much, and we hope to meet you again in the future. Bye.